Even though this is a topic that has been rolling back and forth for months, if not years, there is something that keeps coming into the limelight, especially with Elon Musk and the things that he's done in the last few months. That is the company BYD, or BYD. Some people call it BYD. This is the largest electric car manufacturer. And one of the things that I find really interesting is the fact that it's not available for sale in the United States. It's actually not available for sale in many markets. And there is an entire geopolitical layer behind this. And at the same time, you have the CEO of Ford that goes to China and says that if we don't play catch up, we will be absolutely obliterated in the auto industry. And this is a statement made about the Chinese EV or electric vehicle market because it's just blazed so far ahead. Tesla was the front runner for so many years, and then it's dipped in the last 6 months or so. But at the same time, BYD has just made massive progress, and it's a very young company. And so the article that I was reading in the New York Times really talking about this market is one of those things that I think really merits a discussion because it's such an important industry for us.
Let's talk about the why. Why is BYD, arguably one of the more comfortable, one of the more advanced EVs on the road, not allowed? I mean, this comes down purely to geopolitics. This is exactly where we see geopolitics and tech coming to a head. Wouldn't America want its consumers to have access to the latest and greatest technology? Are they deliberately now disincentivizing Americans to advance themselves just so that they can use this as a power play?
On the one side, you can stop other governments and manufacturers from importing your cars. You can lay on tariffs and you can do all your macroeconomic stuff. But how is it that you're going to tell a consumer that instead of paying $100,000 to Tesla, you can get the same thing for 30 or 40,000? I mean, of course, it's going to obliterate the market. There's going to be massive consumption of Chinese EVs from the American population. Then the only way you can do that is to completely restrict availability in the market because they really would take down the entire American EV industry.
I'm very impressed by how far China has come in its automotive ambitions. I mean, even as far back as like 5 to 8 years ago, no Chinese vehicle was really that well known or popular. In fact, a lot of the domestic Chinese market was importing their vehicles just because there weren't great options. And we tried to see a lot of joint ventures between American companies, German companies to enter China because that's a requirement in China. You got to have that 50%, 51-49% ownership stake, and still nothing. So the fact that China has been able to advance so tremendously in the last 4 to 5 years, I would say, and that too in the EV space, where arguably the US has dominated most of the existence of the EV option, is really remarkable.
I was just listening to the Senate hearing for the search of the new UN ambassador from the United States. And in there, most of the questions were very geared towards China and communist China's presence, both within the aid world, but just geopolitically and geographically even. This concern is something that is very much in the US narrative. I'm less bought into that. I'm not saying that China is a super Western country or has all the ideals of the United States. But at the same time, I don't buy into the communist agenda as much as I do that they are a sheer force of competition. I wish that the narrative would be much clearer to say that they're just a competitive force and they don't need to play as dirty, though they play dirty because it's still in international politics, especially when such large dollar figures are in play. You need to use all the tools that are in your tool belt. That's the part where I'm really wondering, what are the US consumers saying? Because they go to China, like there's so many influencers that fly to China to be able to show autonomous vehicle driving, to be able to try out a lot of these vehicles. I'm just wondering, are they getting frustrated or are they just saying, well, that's just another product we won't have?
I think the average American still doesn't trust China. I mean, look at who the current president of the United States of America is and what his entire platform was about. It was very anti-China. It was very Make America Great Again. So the reason Donald Trump came into office is because the American people agreed with him. And they agree that, yes, to make America great again, you got to invest in America. You got to do that. I mean, Donald Trump went so far as to essentially market pro bono for Tesla a few months ago, where they had all of the massive trucks and all of the vehicles come out to the White House and take the president himself for a spin. That is prime marketing. And for what it's worth, Biden did something very similar with Ford. But on a entire campaign built around making America great again, buying American, the average American consumer, assuming that that is representative of the average American voter, probably doesn't realize what they're missing out on. And frankly, doesn't care. They're probably of that mentality that American is still better than anything made in China.
I have a very fast anecdote because I used to work for General Motors in Detroit. And I remember when I moved there from Canada, I took my BMW down, and I was sitting in a meeting late at night, working probably way too many hours in the week. This was during the financial crisis of GM. And we were literally at that moment where we were calculating when is it that GM is going to go bankrupt. And at the same time, everybody around the table, directors and senior directors alike, were talking about their perks being taken away and what car they're going to buy. And of course, none of them, or almost none of them, stuck with the GM brand. And that's because the narrative of Buy American, it stayed intact until it was now starting to go against the interests of the employees of GM. And so the reason I mention this is because I think that the narrative of Buy American can go as long as the economy stays strong. But at the same time, when things start to falter and people, now we can talk about the big, beautiful bill that is going to start costing people health and livelihoods, including economic livelihoods. When people get to that part of their narrative in their lives, they're now going to be seeking out alternatives, and they may not necessarily be the American ones.
I just think the level of nationalism and pride in the American brand by the American people is far too strong to even consider anything different. I appreciate where you're coming from when it comes to GM and how you saw it during the financial crisis. I was working at Ford, also in Dearborn, close enough to GM. Fantastic falafels. Huge shout out to the Arab community there. But what I noticed is that when the startup I was working for was acquired by Ford, all of the tech CEOs within my startup, very Silicon Valley bred, only had the best and finest cars, immediately switched over to a Ford vehicle. Like, we're part of the Ford family. We got to do it. We got to represent. So we'd have in our tiny Palo Alto garage, massive Ford trucks just coming. And this isn't even the 250. This was the Raptor. It just made no sense in Palo Alto, but you had to represent those American interests.
It's so funny how important this is in order for you to be subscribed to the American agenda. And I totally get it. Again, we talk about it in terms of the geopolitical nature, but I think this is much more akin to the football nature, right? This is your team. You're going to wear the jersey. You're going to wear the hat. You're going to buy season tickets. You're going to go all out. You're going to watch every game. And on the other side, the conversation is completely different because they are really just thinking, how is it that I can take 2% every year? I don't need to take 100% this year. And I think that's the game.